Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be continuing Strength of Schedule week as we talk about the strength of schedule at the quarterback position going into the 2020 fantasy football season. For those of you who are familiar with the channel, we always talk about strength of schedule here throughout the entirety of the regular season to kind of give ourselves as much of an advantage or upper hand on a weekly basis for our respective quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, or receivers. Now, throughout this entire week, I've talked about every single position, but the last position on hand is the quarterbacks. And I really do think, based on all of these guys, I have probably broken down the quarterback position the greatest because there are many factors or variables to what exactly constitutes a strength of schedule at the quarterback position. But now that we can actually add the potential of what their offensive line will face and what the pass rush they will face on a weekly basis will look like, I could potentially give an even greater understanding of what our quarterbacks are in line to see this upcoming season. So we'll talk about my breakdown in terms of what I've calculated this offseason to project the strength of schedule. Then we'll talk about offensive lines and their pass blocking ability against potential pass rushes this upcoming season to kind of give you an understanding of which quarterbacks will be running for their lives this year in comparison to the quarterbacks that are going to be sitting pretty. Because again, a quarterback that's in a clean pocket and comparatively to a quarterback that's just under pressure the entire game and running for their life, I mean, that in itself is a huge difference maker. We could see it in the stats. We've seen it in the box scores. But either way, that's what we're going to be covering today. Now, before we begin, I want to thank all of you who have continued to support the channel. I mean, it's absolutely incredible this entire week. I appreciate you guys continuing to hit the like button. It really does help me out, helps the algorithm a lot. So I appreciate that a lot. For those of you who have joined Patreon or bought my draft kit as of late, thank you very much. For those of you interested in doing so, you go out of the description of the video. You can find more information regarding that. Outside of that, we have a lot of exciting stuff coming next week. Next week, we'll talk about the player positions in terms of their tiers and all that kind of stuff. We have some couple mock drafts coming soon, some defensive rankings and what you should do in terms of drafting defenses, all that coming down the pike. So if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. We're going to be talking about fantasy football for the entirety of the 2020 season. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about the quarterback position. Now, on the right side of the screen, the chart over here is the strength of schedule from the 2019 season. This is from weeks 1 through 16, does not count week 17. And this is how many points defenses gave up to opposing quarterbacks on a weekly basis in a 6-point per passing touchdown format. We found that the Arizona Cardinals were giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks, which was 27.22 per game last season, while the New England Patriots, which was one of the best defenses last year and has continued to stay atop of giving the least amount of points to every single fantasy prospect opposing them last year, gave up only 11.51 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Now, New England Patriots, they lost 6 starters on the defense this offseason, so that's going to play a big factor. But regardless, what we would typically do on a yearly basis, especially last year, this is what I did. You go ahead and you take these numbers and you put it into the 2020 fantasy football schedule, and you go ahead and you give every team that plays against the Arizona Cardinals a 1, and any team that plays against the New England Patriots a 32. You add those numbers up, divided by 16, and you have your potential strength of schedule. And I've done that in the past, but that is not the best way of calculating strength of schedule because, again, there is always going to be players that are drafted, players that are dropped, cut, added to defenses that are going to make a difference in terms of overall play. There are going to be players that overall digress or improve over an offseason and have either better or worse performances than they did last year. There are so many variables, but again, I do think this is just not the best way of calculating it. Though if we had calculated it this way, like we had done in years prior, we would have found that the potential of the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears, Dallas Cowboys would have been atop of the total strength of schedule this upcoming season, had the easiest strength of schedule, while the Kansas City Chiefs, 49ers, Baltimore Ravens would have had the easiest playoff schedule from weeks 14 through 16 of the 2020 season. Now, with this all said, this, in my opinion, is not one of the best ways of determining strength of schedule, but there are going to be similarities between this and my upcoming list because, again, despite all the changes teams have made defensively, they are similar, or they have stayed in the identical spots where they would have. I'll go ahead and show you instead of just talking about it. Let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about my overall calculations and what we can kind of describe to you on screen to give you a better understanding. All right, so what you can see on the very left side of the screen is based on 2019 player grades. I went ahead and I got a grade for every single defensive player that plays coverage on a respective defense. So all 3 linebackers or 4 linebackers, if they go ahead and run a defense like that cover, The corners, nickels, doesn't matter. The two safeties. I went and got 8 or 7 potential starters that play defense and cover on a weekly basis for every respective defense of last year. If you go ahead and you add up the totals of those players and divide by the amount of those players that are left, you went ahead and found that the Washington football team had the lowest overall coverage grade amongst their back end, their back 7 or 8 players, while the San Francisco 49ers and their secondary and linebackers had the best coverage amongst the group. Now, what I went ahead and did after determining that is I went ahead and added that into the 2020 schedule, giving every team that plays against the Washington football team a 1 and playing against the 49ers 32. I added up all 16 of those numbers, divided it by 16, and we ended up finding the middle column, the quarterback strength of schedule, the actual quarterback strength of schedule going into this upcoming season. The Dallas Cowboys have the easiest strength of schedule along with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Seattle Seahawks. On the other hand, unfortunately, on the very bottom, we have ourselves with the Buffalo Bills, the Miami Dolphins, and the Atlanta Falcons. Now, before we talk about these teams and these players in specific, I want to go ahead and address everything on the right side of the screen with the fantasy playoff strength of schedule. That is from weeks 14 through 16, which teams have the best overall strength of schedule going into this upcoming season. The Ravens, Seahawks, 49ers on the top, with the Saints, Rams, and Buffalo Bills on the very bottom. So let's go ahead and move back to the middle column, the actual strength of schedule going into this upcoming season. What we can see on screen, besides the fact that Dak Prescott and Tom Brady and Russell Wilson will be having the easiest strength of schedule this upcoming season, that in itself is incredible because, again, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, 2 of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks in fantasy as of this moment in time. That's a great number. Another quarterback that's in the top echelon, Tom Brady, a guy that's finding a new offense this year and has the potential to even improve from his years prior. Again, Tom Brady has sat around the bottom end of the quarterback one conversation for the last couple of seasons, or has been in that 12-13 range. Now that he has a actual powerful offense in terms of the receiving core, Gronk back, we have a potential of potentially having him in the conversation of a middling or upper end QB1 this upcoming season. On top of the fact that he plays in the NFC South. Those are always shootouts. Those are games that we want to end up seeing. And, Brady can, shoot other teams out if he needs to. He's got a gunslinger's arm. I know he's getting older, but he can end up getting the job done regardless. We also have other quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford, who has shown some promise over the last couple of years. As long as he stays healthy, could be a great fantasy prospect. The Chicago Bears. Who is going to be the starting quarterback? Is it going to be Nick Foles or Mitchell Trubisky? I guess we'll just have to wait and see with Jimmy Garoppolo at 6. Lamar Jackson, the rich getting richer at number 7. Kirk Cousins at 8. Ben Roethlisberger 9. Phillip Rivers at 10. Dwayne Haskins 11. And Joe Burrow at 12. Now, when we look at the bottom end of the list, a couple things that concern me. First and foremost, the fact that Josh Allen plays against the 30th or actually the 3rd toughest strength of schedule this upcoming season. We could just say it like that. Josh Allen, for many of you who remember, last season had the easiest strength of schedule after about week 7. I mean, he played Miami twice. He played the Eagles secondary. He played a bunch of defenses that just weren't up to par last season, and he absolutely went off and put up great performances that consistently were ample for a starting quarterback in the National Football League in terms of fantasy football, and gave him and allowed him to finish within the top, 10 fantasy quarterbacks last year, 4-point per passing touchdown formats, and even 10 or 6-point per passing touchdown formats. Now that he goes into this upcoming season with his inaccuracies as the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, if in fact he cannot improve, he is going to be in a world of hurt. We could talk about his strength of schedule later down the line, but there are a bunch of games there in which he has to play against the New England Patriots secondary, which he struggled against throughout his entire career. He has to play against the Broncos, the Steelers. There are going to be great secondaries that he has to face on a weekly basis. It's going to really put him to the test this year. Another team that we got to look at down here. We have Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans down here. That in itself, I'm not too worried about. But again, it's going to really show whether or not they need DeAndre Hopkins if, in fact, Deshaun Watson begins to struggle within this offense. And then the Atlanta Falcons at number 32, because I'm not too worried about the Miami Dolphins at this moment in time. We'll see what the quarterback, position kind of grants us to kind of look forward to. Regardless, the Atlanta Falcons with the hardest strength of schedule at the quarterback position. Again, Matt Ryan has struggled over the last couple of years. Every other year, he's good. And that in itself is a very scary prospect because, again, he could have a great year this year. And if he stays healthy, plays all 16 games, he would have been a top 12 quarterback last year. Just as long as he stays healthy, this offense is looking like they're much more improved in terms of experience and or overall depth of talent than last year. We have ourselves an opportunity that Matt Ryan's going to have to step up to the plate. But again, he has a very difficult schedule on hand. When we look at the fantasy football playoffs, again, if you're taking Lamar Jackson early, you're being, paid for it. If you take Russell Wilson, you're getting, a lot out of it. Outside of that, any other middling quarterbacks, the New Orleans Saints sitting at 13, great number right there. We have ourselves with even the Eagles and Carson Wentz. Even though Carson Wentz is kind of slept on by many, he's going in the 9th or 10th rounds of drafts. You can go ahead and grab a guy that's going to have an easier schedule. I know his offensive line is falling apart by the daily, but we could end up seeing a pretty good season there from a quarterback like that with an easier strength of schedule in comparison to the rest of the pack. Now, what I wanted to go ahead and do is I want to hop on screen real quick. Again, remind everybody that these rankings do not 100% determine success. There are a lot of variables to that. And even though a schedule could be easy, I've seen many NFL teams show up to a game and get stomped. I mean, let's not forget, even though Dak Prescott is going to have the easiest strength of schedule this season, he showed up against the New York Jets last season and absolutely was horrible. There are many weeks in which they're going to have easier strength of schedules and they're not going to perform. So do not think that this is the end all be all and this is how you should be determining who is the most valuable this upcoming season. This is just another variable that we can look at to determine what we could potentially see down the line and or anticipate. Regardless, I wanted to go ahead and also mention that we're going to be talking about offensive lines, right? So let's talk about offensive lines and who has the best protection in the National Football League. Because again, if in fact you are under pressure, the quarterback position is completely different when you're scrambling and you're trying to survive from getting ran down by a couple 280, 330 pound monsters of the defensive line. So again, we'll talk about offensive line here and I'll go ahead and drop off the screen. All right, so now we could see the screen fully. I'll be able to explain to you guys exactly what we're going to be anticipating this upcoming season in terms of offensive lines and pass blocking and defensive lines and their potential pass rush. Now, on the very left side, we have offensive line average pass block grade, What we went and we found with all 5 starters of every offensive line, the worst pass blocking offensive line in the National Football League is awarded to the Minnesota Vikings, as they averaged a 56.62 average grade in terms of pass blocking, while the Las Vegas Raiders have by far and away the best offensive line when it comes to pass blocking. Derek Carr, get the job done. You've got the most receivers you've probably ever had in your career this year. Please get it done. Regardless, this was the breakdown of how effective offensive lines were last season in terms of pass protection. Now, when we go to the middle column here, we see defensive line average pass rush grade. Last season, from the 4 rushers that are the primary pass rushers of every team, I understand Khalil Mack is a quoted outside linebacker, but I did not calculate him for a coverage guy in our prior section. He is a defensive end through and through, and he's going to be included in here and not in the other chart. Same thing with a Von Miller or a Shaq Barrett. Regardless, hopefully this kind of makes sense. Overall, what we found was the worst overall pass rush going into the 2020 season is going to come potentially from the Seattle Seahawks based off of their average grades in pass rushing situations last year. Again, you're losing the Jadeveon Clowney, which is a huge difference there, and it's going to make a huge. In itself is going to be a pretty big problem for them. But regardless, and then we found ourselves with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Far and away with the best pass rushing defensive line in the National Football League. When you have TJ Watt on one side and you have Bud Dupree, Hayward, Tuitt, they're going to get after the quarterback easily. And they went ahead and they did that last year. And that's why they are pretty much the best pass rush this upcoming season. Now, what exactly did I do to calculate the numbers? I went ahead and I filled out the entire 2020 schedule with the defensive pass rushes that teams will be facing. Then I went ahead and I added up all 16 games for all 32 teams. Then I times their offensive line grade by 16 and subtracted the 2 numbers. The total of their schedule from this upcoming season in terms of playing against different pass rushes, then their potential pass rush grade for this upcoming season. Subtracted those numbers and we found that the Miami Dolphins are going to be in a world of trouble. not only do they suck at pass blocking and pass rushing, they're going to be facing some of the better defenses in the National Football League, and they are in a world of hurt. Whoever's sitting in at quarterback, whether it's Ryan Fitzpatrick or Tua Tagovailoa, he is going to be running for his life regardless. And then we also found that, sure, the Las Vegas Raiders, they have the best offensive line in terms of pass protection, and they're going to have a significant advantage over just about everyone that they play this year, and pretty much got themselves a 222.8 point cushion in terms of protection. Now, that's the best way that I could have potentially calculated. I'm not a complete genius in terms of calculating all this, but it does, in my opinion, give me a pretty good understanding of who exactly is in line to have some pretty good overall protection at the quarterback position. A couple of the things that we see that it's kind of surprising. Deshawn Watson last season had one of the best pass blocking offensive lines. Going into this upcoming season, he's once again going to be well protected. I know a couple years back, it was all about, dude, the guy got sacked 60 times in a year. We need to protect our quarterback. That's why they brought in Laremy Tunsil. That's why they drafted Titus Howard. I mean, they brought in the ample protection. They've gone ahead and executed on that. Patrick Mahomes, going to be heavily protected, of course. Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line, a top 10 line there. The Arizona Cardinals will have an advantage. Now, it's not going to be a huge one, but it's going to be good enough to where Kyler Murray, even though he's going to be scrambling, trying to figure stuff out, he'll have enough time to hopefully give himself a couple extra seconds so he can find DeAndre Hopkins open later down the field. But the teams that are going to struggle the most are obviously the teams that just don't have great offensive lines. And it's not a surprise that they're going to struggle. The Miami Dolphins, Carolina Panthers, Minnesota Vikings, and the Los Angeles Rams. I mean, to be honest, and even the Bears. Those are all teams that had the worst offensive lines last year, and they're potentially going to have the worst offensive lines this year, and it's not a surprise that they're going to be up against it. Of course, they could definitely improve, but that is to just, kind of be seen in the coming days. Either way, that is pretty much my breakdown. We figured out exactly who has the most advantageous schedules going into the 2020 season for the quarterback position. Figured out who has the best pass blocking offensive line and who's going to be sitting pretty this upcoming year and who's going to be running for their damn lives or throwing the ball 10 yards over a receiver's head out of bounds because they're getting ran down by Ndamukong Suh. But regardless, thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate the support. If you like today's video and the analysis that I broke down and all the stats that I've kind of been working on for the last couple months, go ahead and like today's video. I really do appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel for those of you who are new. Click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Notifies you when my latest video is out. Thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.